met Charles Johnson at a nonviolence training by the Institute of Nonviolence. Supposed to be recording. Okay. Not recording again. So anyway, so yeah, that's where I met him, and it was actually taught by, can't remember the young lady's last name. Her first name was Ashley, and also Professor Bennett Lee, who is the founder of one of the organizations I'm with, the National Alliance for the Empowerment of the Formerly Incarcerated. I'm also a member of PNAP out of Northeastern Illinois University, which is the Prison and Neighborhoods Arts program. And so the importance of those two organizations are that, with PNAP, Prison Neighborhood and Arts program, is that they have what you call the University Without Walls. And they help prisoners in Stateville attain bachelor's degree. And a lot of the programs have been taken away out of the prisons. So the whole concept of rehabilitation is basically negated by them not having enough programs in the prisons. And we have a saying in NAEFI that you can't build your shield while you're on the battlefield. And so a lot of what we mean is that a lot of these prisoners, they are not successfully rehabilitated so that they can come out and can be productive members of society. Like myself, I just got out of prison like last year. I did 24 years. Fortunately for me, I had, certain coping skills that helped me be able to rehabilitate myself, because in a lot of the prisons where I resided, they did not have the, the necessary resources to be able to rehabilitate me according to how the times have changed. They didn't have computer classes and things like that. And when they did, some of the instructors ended up leaving because they were being harassed by the administration, the staff that were there. Also availability. A lot of the prisons, a lot of the inmates, a lot of the prisoners come from places like Chicago, East St. Louis, where there's a considerably large Black population. But the prisons are in rural areas, away from the city, and away from Black communities. So what happens is a lot of those prisons are in areas where there aren't people who want to work there. So that, so you have like the subcultural differences, location, proximity. Those are issues that you have with having instructors, people who are willing to go in there. So it's a big problem when you're talking about rehabilitation, trying to help guys become productive members of society. So once they get out, a lot of them don't have, they're not capable of coming out and being productive because they weren't taught. They didn't have those resources there. So that's why it's very important to talk about, the prison industrial complex. And when we look at America, like all the things that we're talking about right now, where we talk about with nuclear weapons and so forth, and militarism, it's a mentality. When we look at what's going on right now in society, in America, the need to bear arms, right? We don't live in those times anymore. Like when they came up with the Second Amendment, we understand what was going on with the redcoats and so forth. We don't live in that society anymore. We don't live in those times, but we know that this has been it's part of American culture. It's part of traditions that's been passed down, and we need to reevaluate that, the Second Amendment, because we see that all of these people feel the need to carry these guns, to bear arms, because it's part of their psyche. And so when we talk about militarism, when we talk about nuclear weapons, individuals don't have access to nuclear weapons, but just the mindset that we need to have a weapon, that we need to carry something, that it gives us power. And nuclear weapons were created for what? So that one particular nation or these greater nations, right, could have this power over others. And so what we have accepted, what we have been indoctrinated with is the need to have a weapon that will give us power. And it has trickled down even to just the regular people in society. It's this goes back to the foundation of the Constitution and our amendments. And with the prison industrial complex, when you look at the 13th Amendment, a lot of people have not really read the 13th Amendment. And this is when I had an awakening, a realization. I read the 13th Amendment, and it said that slavery is abolished except if one has been convicted of a felony. And so that was an eye-opener for me when I read the 13th Amendment, because it was practically saying that I'm a slave now that I am in prison. And so we see remnants of that today, even with community service. A lot of people, they look at that and they see it as nothing. And people, they cop out for probation because they think that it's something that's light. It's a slap on the wrist, but actually this is a perpetuation of slavery. And when they were leasing out slaves and so forth. So I think that, and I think that it was important when I don't remember his name, but he was referring to Martin Luther King's speech about Vietnam and the war and so forth. And so I have a poem entitled "The Dream," because Charles, he had heard, some of my poetry, and I'm basically self-taught. I taught myself, even though I ended up having formal education, attended Lakeland College, but I essentially taught myself poetry and how to write and speak and so forth while I was incarcerated. So I feel like it's pertinent because he had mentioned Dr. Martin Luther King, and as he said, that his speech is still relevant today. So this is entitled "The Dream." I dreamt that I stood at the balcony of the Lorraine Motel down in Memphis on that dreadful day when they murdered MLK. The blast from the shot rang loudly as the men panicked and pointed at the sight of the horrific plight that had fallen upon their anointed. The scattered remains of his corpus was all I saw, for the bullet burst through his cheek and then it crushed his jaw, and I swear at that very moment, it felt like the earth stopped revolving and time had frozen, for the principalities had stolen the one the ages had chosen to be our Black Moses. And the sky began to darken as the clouds turned the color purple, and the moon was in every street, and every ghetto in America was inundated with rivers of crimson, for the asphalt wept the blood of 144,000 martyrs. And arising from those bloody waters were the voices of my forefathers, uttering the last words, whose bodies swung like strange fruit from trees on southern plantations. While the leaves were singing words to Negro spirituals until they merged like a confluence of streams into the distinct voice of the one that I recognized from the archives. And when that voice materialized, my God, it was Martin, transfigurated in all his splendor. He approached me with arms open wide and a countenance ever so tender, and he said, "Do not let your heart be overwhelmed with sorrow, for these were tragedies of yesterday, but hope still lies in our tomorrow." Then he took my hand and placed it upon his wound, and I trembled as I felt trauma likened to a child when it slides through the canal of its mother's womb, as I felt myself fall into time, slipping in the darkness to speed of light, staring at the world through my rear view, moving down the highways of my life as I traveled back to Senegal through the door of no return, then crossed the oceans to the Carolinas where nooses hung and crosses burned. And I witnessed for a face that bombed, and when the smoke finally cleared, I was in the embrace of Martin's arms as I was born by the river, the Mississippi, baptized, water and fire, water, earth and wind. The wind pulled and lifted me up, carried me through the valley of death to the concrete jungles of the murder capital, where they murder for capital, where the deep boys are dealing that boy, having street dreams of riches and glory, but end up filling the prisons and morgues. That's when I heard the wind say, "Son, we brought you here because we want you to observe the degeneration of these generations, ramification of a dream diverged. This isn't what we envisioned, to march for freedom only to have our sons and daughters fill up these prisons, escaping the plantations just to wind up in chains, having the gains of the movement squandered and sacrifices rendered in vain. Never forget from where you came, because if you do, then the future's lost, for your ancestors paid the cost. Now you too must bear this cross. We all must climb this mountain in order to attain the prize, for life isn't worth living until one has found a cause for which he is willing to die." That's when I realized the wisdom of all my teachers and the passionate speeches. Then the abruptly to the balcony scene, back at that motel in Memphis where they murdered the beloved king. But to my surprise, I looked down to see that the corpse on the floor dormant was no longer Martin. It was me. So that's a poem that I wrote that was inspired by an actual dream.
That was awesome, Ryan.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very good.
It was inspired by an actual dream that I had while I was in prison. But so these are two of my publications. One is entitled The Rose That Grew Through the Barbed Wire, and the other is entitled Inside the Box. And this one I'm the most proud of because it's a book that consists of poetry and art. And what I was trying to do at the time was I was trying to motivate the administration to implement a creative arts program. And so I had my own individual accomplishments, but I could have just been the exception. You always have an exception. But so what I did was I commissioned other inmates who were artists to help me create the book. And, I paid them and I gave them credit for their work. But I wanted to show the administration that there were others who were just as interested in having the arts implemented in the programs because they didn't have that many programs there. It's very limited. Let's just say if you have 2,000 prisoners, you may have maybe 250 out of the 2,000 who are allowed access to education. And so I was trying to get them to implement more programs that could help them because especially in the prison that I was in at the time, which was considered a disciplinary prison, a high medium, where guys are in their cells for like 22 hours a day. And that's because of what I had mentioned earlier. A lot of it has to do with proximity of people or communities that are willing to come into those prisons. And, having people volunteer and so forth that may do prison outreach as far as ministries are concerned, but even being able to hire people who would work in there. I knew instructors that they said that they liked working there, but they weren't getting paid enough to go into the facilities and that they had to travel too far and so forth. And so what happens is you have a lot of people who are incarcerated who spend a considerable amount of their time in there without education and the resources needed so that they could be successfully rehabilitated. So what does that do to the community when they come back? Of course, they've sat in there spending a lot of their time idly, and then they come back and it's difficult for them to obtain, it was already difficult for a lot of them to be able to obtain employment. So just imagine the time that they spent in there. Society has changed, especially for me. I had to learn everything on the fly right here, out here in society, the internet, because I didn't have access to it due to me being in facilities where the people, they either didn't have people who taught computer tech classes or they quit, because they didn't want to be there. So I had to learn all this stuff out here on my own. There was nobody that taught me. I had to learn right here. And I'm still struggling. I've come a long way in the last year that I've been out. But can you imagine? None of this stuff existed before I got locked up. I did 24 years. I went in as a teenager and I came out and having to learn all these things. So in Illinois, especially, I think we just got MP3 players in 2018 in the prisons.
I have a question.
So can you how far back? Yes, ma'am.
When you were referring to the administration, I'm assuming you mean the administration at the prison.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, some people, when you say administration, they think, larger government institution, as opposed to administration being, the folks who were running the prison. So just wanted to make sure I was clarifying.
Yeah, okay, yes, definitely. I'm talking about the people that were running the prison, and then each prison is different, because you have a different staff there. So in some prisons, depending on who the wardens are, right, they may allow more things to take place. Then even politics are even involved in that, with budgets, money that's being allocated towards prisons and so forth, what they feel is important. So all of those things determine the quality that prisons receive. And there's a lot of legislation that's passed that people aren't aware of that affects the prisons, and what will happen to those communities that a lot of those prisoners return to. It's just kind of like similar to African Americans, the name and how it's changed over the years, or how we've been defined. The same thing with people who are prisoners. The term that is used now is returning citizens, but that is a misnomer. And the reason why it's a misnomer is because once we are let out of prison, all of our rights aren't restored to us.
Correct. Yeah. So in terms of that, and your reference to the 13th Amendment, I mean, it's, I know that there are movements afoot to change the law so that it's easier for you to get your voting rights back, as opposed to felons automatically in perpetuity losing their voting rights. Can you speak to that a little bit? What's the status in Illinois?
Okay, well, Illinois, you get your voting rights back in Illinois.
Okay.
You do get that. But there are other rights depending on, what type of crime you've been convicted of that you can't get, that aren't restored to you. So every state is even different when it comes to that. But with Illinois, you can vote. You can vote. And then a lot of people think they don't know the difference. Like if you're in a county jail, as long as you're in the county jail and you haven't been convicted of a felony, you can vote. There are people who still vote in the county jail as long as they haven't been convicted, because you're awaiting trial. So that's the difference between being in a jail, county jail, and a prison. But yes, you get your voting rights restored to you. But depending on what type of crime you were convicted of, there are certain rights that aren't restored. And so that's something that definitely needs to be fought. And just looking at like the 13th Amendment, the fact that it still exists, it's just, to me, it's a shame that that amendment still exists. And, so, but there are a lot of things about the prison industrial complex that people aren't aware of, and it still affects us to this day. Anybody has any other question?
What about the cash bail and that whole bond system? I mean, the number of incarcerated who sit in county forever, longer than many people have as prison sentences, because they can't afford the bond to get out to await trial or whatever. I mean, that's another huge thing having to do with the carceral program or, administration.
They have been working toward making changes. I don't know all the details of that because, it's been a very long time since I had to face, even though I was under those circumstances of having a bond.
Which is a very good thing. Yeah. I mean, not a good thing that you had to spend 24 years in prison, but yeah, just curious if you knew the status of, because I know that there are organizations actively working on that piece of the equation. So what other, I mean, anybody else who has questions, unmute yourself and jump in. But are there other forms of arts within the prisoner and neighborhood arts program that are also supported in addition to the poetry that you engage in?
Oh yes, like if you go to and you can look them up, they're on Facebook, PNAP, PNAP. That is the acronym for that. And yeah, you can go on Instagram. Yeah, there's more than poetry. Like there are inmates who have written books. There are artists, and they've been able to have their work displayed at exhibitions and so forth. And then there are just like programs, even talking about subjects such as this, that they have. Of course, because of COVID, a lot of what they were doing has been somewhat stifled because they were actually, I think, being able to participate and have interaction with the prisoners. But hopefully they'll be able to, interact more and be able to go into the prisons and so forth. Now that some of these things are being, some of the restrictions are being lifted. But yeah, if you go there, you'll find that they had a curriculum that consisted of more than just poetry, just other parts of the arts. And I believe, if I'm correct, had begun trying to even in Stateville maximum prison, security prison. So, but yeah, that's like kind of like for me, by that being my experience, because there are so many talented people in the prison industrial, system. I knew a guy that could read and write music, the notes and everything, that I was part of a music program with, but has life, will never get out. And so it's very important, I think, for prisoners to have education in there, because now we're talking about a human thing, right? If we believe that prison is is torture, then we have to fight for. And I want to say this: they have put more emphasis on trying to implement programs in the prisons where the inmates will be getting out soon. And I understand the whole concept. I understand that. A guy with 2, 3, 4 years, you want to focus on him getting out so that he could be productive. But what happens is, example like me, a guy who had so many years, a very long time, what does it do to a person that does not have, the coping skills to teach himself, right? What does it do if he spends 17, 18, 19 years and he has, let's say, 25-year sentence? What does it do to his mind? By the time he becomes eligible to even enter into a facility where these resources are available, what has happened to his mind? Is he capable now of even participating in something like that will be beneficial to him? Because for so many years, he languished in a place where, it was just dark. It was very dismal. So before he can even get to that point, a lot of those guys' minds have already, been debilitated, and they're not even prepared to even participate in something like that. So those are things that are not talked about, and a lot of people out here are not aware of, because they believe that, sometimes they try to paint the picture that guys in there are, living a pretty good lifestyle, and you may see certain things they may show on television to say, hey, these guys are doing this, or we have this available, but all prisons are not the same. So when you see that in one place they may be doing this and they may be doing that, but in a lot of other places they don't have access to those resources.
Yeah. Would you say that the privately run prisons are probably worse than the ones that have, sorry, brain freeze, run by the state or the Department of Corrections or whatever?
Because I was always in a state-run facility, so I can't really speak on that, but it's it's one of those things that it could be dangerous, right? By a privately owned prison. I believe there's a danger in that. But you could have some people that come in and they could possibly provide some resources that could be beneficial, but there's always a danger in that, because once again, we're playing with the whole idea of slavery, right? Being able to lease out people for slave labor. And so one thing that I do like about New York that has not been implemented in many of the other states is the fact that they tell them that if they work for a particular company while they're incarcerated, then they have to hire them once they get out after they've worked for a certain amount of time within prisons.
That's cool.
That just because you had these guys working for you, then once they get out, you just discard them. They've set up a system. I don't know all the details, but they've set up a system that if you were working for this particular industry while you were incarcerated, once you get out, I guess after you go through, a little phase or whatever, they hire you once you're out. So I think that's something that's pretty good, right? And that needs to be implemented in other states, especially Illinois.
Absolutely. So Torrin had his hand raised.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a voracious reader, but I didn't quickly enough write down what were the books you mentioned earlier?
So the book is The Rose That Grew Through the Barbed Wire.
I'll put them in the chat. Okay.
Okay. And Inside the Box. These are two of my three books. And the other one is entitled Birthmark. But I just brought these, I just had these visible because these two are like about prison. Birthmark is a little different and it was written in a different style, but these two talk about my experience in prison and they depict that, especially The Rose That Grew Through the Barbed Wire. Like I said, that's the one that I'm most proud of because I was able to get, and it's hard to get inmates to come together, right? Prisoners to come together and for something that's positive because based on their own experience, they have so many reasons to be pessimistic. And I had a lot of resistance, even with implementing a creative writing program in there, simply because it was an idea that came from me as a prisoner. And I looked at me as being someone that was beneath them, And so, yeah, that's it. So that was something, I had a lot of resistance to that. Fortunately, serendipity, I think, was on my side. The fact that I had come into the facility while there were two people, the head of internal affairs, and also one of the wardens was retired. That's not a new thing that they wouldn't do if they had to be there because of the politics that are involved. So I was very fortunate to come there during that time, and they were willing to assist me in pushing it forward, my proposal. But so yeah, I'll recite another poem. Let me see. So I actually wrote one based on, and so I don't want to butcher it, but I haven't really had time to practice it. I actually woke up this morning and I began writing it because I felt it. So here it is. Maybe the coronavirus and the catastrophic state of the climate is a reaction to the violence waged by the imperialist machine, raging like bulls on a parade, or armies of locusts obliterating our green days as the toxicity of our avaricious ways invoke plagues, hence H1N1 and AIDS. And the water used to drink from the earth is either scarce or cursed by contamination, oil spills and radiation, inciting mutations in the ecosystem as we go shifting out of chemical balance, becoming victims of our own malice and callous tactics we practice until we are trapped in our own prison of greed, living by creeds that 1%ers made to create a market of slaves that are traded like livestock, for our very lives are treated like stock on the NASDAQ. And maybe this is Mother Nature's way to blast back the universe's version of insurgents for all the innumerable innocents murdered in the name of twisted religious fervor and a sick narcissistic sense of manifest destiny. Recipes for apocalypse now, as our souls are being sold on the Dow Jones of the great Wall Street of China, as we walk around in the blissful ignorance of deception, pledging allegiance to a false sense of entitlement that was made in the USA. And so that was what I wrote this morning. And I just felt like it was perfect. Like just all of what we've been discussing, you know, as far as militarism and the state of our planet. All of these things are interconnected, even though we are led to believe that they're separate, but they all are interconnected. And going back to Martin Luther King, these are all things that, you know, Martin Luther King would, if he were alive today, would address. And if when we are divided, and, you know, we've seen people use that tribalism and division to for political gains, right? And so when we're divided and we're just thinking about our own individual interests, then that's when people are able to, you know, I guess you could say they're able to prosper, because instead of us coming together to support one another's interests, we become selfish and greedy because we think that one interest is greater than the other.
Yeah, I think that
I would like to jump in, because part of what we're talking about was not only through the creative arts, but the activism, propelling change through activism. And in Wisconsin, I belong to a group called Wisdom, and we have it's a faith-based social justice group that one of our issues we've been working on for a good 15 years now is how to change what I call the injustice system that is criminal. And we have also a group that formed through the state of Wisconsin called Expo, and that stands for ex people incarcerated or ex-incarcerated people who are organizing. And their motto is, we have the right to not remain silent. And that is a group that's actually been picking up a lot of steam over the last couple of years. And it's all formerly incarcerated people that are becoming very active and pushing forward rights such as, you know, banning the box and voting rights and bail bond issues and ending solitary confinement and truth in sentencing, and the list goes on and on. And so I don't know if Illinois has anything to that effect, but I would hope that, Orion, maybe you could get in touch with somebody from our Expo group up here, and you all have to do is just Google the Expo of Wisconsin and maybe start a group down there that, you know, has the same kind of a intention to, you know, bring their issues to the forefront and let people, you know, incarcerated people come together and do what they feel is right. So I just wanted to throw that out there before we run out of time, because you guys have rights too. And I think as a group, I think you're more empowered because you're working with people that have been in the same situations you have been. So.
And I think I've heard of Expo. I think there's, because I was in Kenosha, right, last week. We were doing a violence interrupters training. Then, as a result of what had gone on at the time with Jacob Blake and the police. And so we were up there in like May and early June. And I met a young woman, I think that had been a participant of Expo, named Erica Ness. And I had seen something like about Expo, but I didn't know any, you know, thing specifically about it other than it existed. So yeah, definitely. And like our NAEFI, the National Alliance for the Empowerment of Formerly Incarcerated, our slogan is, when does my wrong end and my rights begin? And what people don't know is that with people who are ex-felons, is that they are not a protected class. And so like all other women, the LGBTQ, you know, African Americans are all a protected class, except for ex-felons. And so that's something that we're trying to push for. There are a lot of things that we're not are not accessible to us because we're not a protected class. And if you look at how many people are incarcerated, you know, who are incarcerated, have been incarcerated, but they have a record, that's a lot of people. And if we could become considered as a protected class, then we could affect votes in a lot of states, especially places like Illinois, where there's a high population of people who are either incarcerated or are formerly incarcerated. And so the next thing is trying to get the votes in the prisons, because you can vote when you're in the county, like I said, because you have not been convicted, but allowing people to be able to vote in the prisons and restoring a lot of rights to people who are formerly incarcerated, then that would make a big block of power and would affect some of the votes in a lot of those states.
Yep, and Wisconsin, I know, is trying to bring that forward to restore rights, even if you're in prison, because you should have the option to vote. And there's something to do in Wisconsin with, you are counted as a voter if you live, while whatever prison you're in is considered where you live and not opposed to where you come from, which is stupid because the funding gets all messed up through all that. And so, yeah, there's a lot of work in Wisconsin to try to restore a lot of this. So I'm sure it's a nationwide thing, but I just wanted to pass it on to you. So
Thank you. And that's another thing too, that we have a problem with, like in Illinois, they that even though you are not from there, what they do is, and this is to try to like get a lot of funding in those places, they count similar to like when it almost makes you think about when they were doing the 3/5 of a slave and the compromise back in, you are as part of the census of the prison, the area where you are residing as a prisoner. And so it's almost like similar in how they used that 3/5 of a man back then when they did the compromise between the North and the South. But you can't vote. You know what I mean? They count you in the census, but you have no voting rights. Very similar. And that's what's eerie. That's what's scary, is that these are still practices that continue to exist, even though we claim that we've gone through a lot of change. So I thank you all for coming, and it's been a great experience, and I'm glad that I've been able to participate. And if you have any more questions or would like to learn about any of organizations that I'm part of and our causes, then you can contact Mr. Johnson, and he can give you information and give you my information.